been some huge developments over the last 24 hours with two of Newcastle United's main summer transfer targets, and in this episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, we're going to have a look at what those are. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much to everybody who has continued to support me. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and hit like on this video because it really does help. Today there aren't any new rumours to discuss, but there are developments on James Trafford and Joao Pedro. Burnley have apparently asked for £40 million for James Trafford rather than the £30 million that I mentioned in my video and repeated yesterday. And I think that it's important to note that, as I said a couple of days ago, things are fluid, things change, people do get told different things at different times, and also Sky had reported 30 million a couple of days ago as well. It's very much a negotiating tactic, I think. Burnley probably looked at the situation and thought that the fact that we're now a Premier League club, we've got to make life difficult for Newcastle. I don't think that this is by any means the deal breaker that it maybe appears to be in terms of the fact that he's valued at that price, because I don't think that Burnley will end up getting that price. I think, as I said before, the price was set at 20 last season. It was set at 30, as I say, earlier in the summer, as far as I was aware. If Newcastle have finally come to the table, then it makes sense from Burnley's perspective to try and eke out as much money as they possibly can. If Newcastle stick with this, it's very similar to the Tino Livramento situation, if you remember, where Newcastle were consistently quoted 50 million, 45 million, 40 million, and they eventually signed him for 32 with add-ons. And I think that is kind of where Newcastle are going to be with James Trafford, because he has vocally said that he wanted to leave last summer. I don't think that that's really going to change this summer. The fact that he's in the England squad, he'll want to be playing in the Champions League. And there's a crucial point here that Thomas Tuchel said. He wants his goalkeepers to be playing European football if possible. Obviously Jordan Pickford is the number one and he isn't at Everton. Maybe that might change in the coming weeks and months, but in terms of where he plays. But James Trafford is in the England squad, he's in the England picture, he wants to be pushing for that spot, and the opportunity to play for a Champions League club will certainly help that in so many regards. It's very rare that players upset the apple cart with the transfer request because of loyalty bonuses and all that sort of thing, so I don't expect him to be very vocal about refusing to play or pushing it through, which is what a lot of buying clubs want prospective players to do, but it rarely ever comes off like that. And I just think if Newcastle stick with this, then they'll get him for around 30, maybe just over £30 million, because Burnley don't have the strongest case. As I said, they were already interested in a Turkish goalkeeper, according to reports the other week. So I think although £40 million has been set as the first price, I think Newcastle are getting very vocal about the fact that they're frustrated by being held to ransom and by this inverted commas Saudi or Newcastle tax, which means that if you're selling, this is the problem with buying from Premier League clubs. If you're a Premier League selling club and you don't necessarily have to sell, then you're just going to make it difficult. You're going to ramp the price up to frustrate Newcastle and hope that they do walk away, and that it possibly might happen. But for me, I still think that this deal will get done for around £30 million, that just maybe over, because that hasn't really changed. I know that the news has broken that it's more than it was, but as I say, I think that this is just opportunism from Burnley. At this stage, we don't really know. There are other options on the table for Newcastle. Lucas Chevalier from Lille is very highly rated across Europe. He's been linked with Manchester United and Manchester City as well. He's got a €40 million release clause in his contract, so that's a cheaper deal on the face of it to do if Newcastle want to go and get another very highly rated goalkeeper, 23 years old, huge sort of potential, and proven played in the Champions League. And this is kind of in evidence of what I've been saying about the difference between the domestic markets and the European markets. You've got James Trafford, who's an excellent prospect of a goalkeeper, being talked about for £40 million. That's, as I say, context around that, but even 30 million, which is around the same price for Lucas Chevalier, who's played in the Champions League and got into the latter stages of that competition. Again, it's that sort of crossroads, but Eddie Howe wants James Trafford. I don't think Newcastle will be perturbed in terms of walking away. Maybe there'll be some posturing, maybe it'll be reported that they're going to walk away, but these deals, Newcastle are very, very well known for not really walking away from deals. If you look at all the transfer targets that they've been linked with, Joao Pedro being one, Mark Gahey, Trafford himself, Anthony Elanga, they're all sort of long-term targets. Once Newcastle lock in on a player, they tend to be open to doing deals. So I would say that yes, the £40 million price tag has most likely been given to Newcastle. I don't doubt that the reports aren't true, and that is contradictory to what I was saying the other day about 30 million. But I think it's posturing. For me, at this stage, Newcastle can get the deal down. Remember what happened with Tino Livramento. It's a long, arduous process to try and get a domestic player out of a relegated club at that point. Southampton had very little power in that negotiation, and yet they dug in and got a deal. Newcastle did meet them in the middle, but it was more expensive than Newcastle were originally planning on paying, I think. Trafford might be slightly, as I say, there might be a meeting in the middle, maybe 30, 35, but I don't think £40 million as the opening gambit from Burnley is going to put Newcastle off completely, despite what's sort of been emerging in the last 24 hours. So just keep calm a little bit, is what I would say on James Trafford. The other thing to mention is Joao Pedro, and he's apparently very keen to move to Newcastle and available for between 50 and 60 million pounds, according to various reports. Luke Edwards wrote in his piece in the Telegraph that the Brazilian striker is keen. Brighton are obviously open to a sale as well, because he had some disciplinary issues at the back end of last season, and the price is apparently coming down, according to a couple of other reports as well. So if Newcastle can, similarly to Trafford, work on a deal that maybe comes down at a decent price, maybe sort of closer to 50 million or 45 million, then perhaps that is a good deal that Newcastle would get a lot out of. But the initial price of sort of 70 million down to 60 million, I still think that's a little bit high, considering the fact that he doesn't, I've mentioned this so many times, he doesn't fit in the squad on the right hand side. He would only play either as a second fiddle to Alexander Isak or as a number 10. He wouldn't play in the position that he calls his best position, that number 9 role, very often, and I think that's a lot of money to pay for a player of that sort of ilk. But he's a very, very good player, and if the price can come down, and it seems like maybe that this one is moving a little bit further, and I think he wants to move from Brighton. Brighton are open to selling him at the right price, and that price is already coming down. Newcastle needs to dig in a little bit, but this is the reality of what we've been saying, and there is a little bit of context around the transfer window and how early people are moving, because it's shifted because of the mini window after the because of the Club World Cup. That's what's impacted this completely. So anyhow wants players in by pre-season, and that's still weeks away. So so they do have time to maybe have a little bit of a chat with Joao Pedro and Burnley over James Trafford. This is positive news, though, in terms of getting those players in. I think that there are positive signs. They're still working on Anthony Elanga, still having conversations, but there's no real breakthrough there, unfortunately, at this stage. But progress is being made with Joao Pedro, and as I say, please don't get too downhearted about the news about James Trafford, because it very often is posturing. As I say, think of the Tino Livramento deal. That dragged on a little bit, but this is the reality that Newcastle have to accept. They've made a decision to go for domestic-based players, and they don't want to be held to ransom. That is very much not conducive to what Eddie Howe was saying about quick and speedy action. So you've kind of got to pick your battles, and if Newcastle are going in for James Trafford with a newly promoted side who don't want to sell, and they're being very vocal about the fact that they don't want to be held to ransom, it's very easy to set a high bar and see if Newcastle have the resolve. I think they do have the resolve. I think this one will rumble on. I think it will get closer to maybe just over 30 million. That's my gut feeling. As I say, I haven't had conversations with anybody since I was told the initial price of around 30 a couple of weeks ago. But these things, as I say, they move quickly. It's rarely linear. As I said the other day, people talk to different people. Different news emerges that contradicts, and it's all very, very confusing. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. I hope this has been informative and a little bit of a calming video. I'm at St James's Park for the Sam Fender gig tonight, so it's either tomorrow's episode will either be later once I've got back, or it might be an evergreen episode that I record today to put out, so I don't have to worry about it. But there will be some content tomorrow. Please like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.